Iran thought closing the Strait of Hormuz was its ultimate weapon. Tehran spent decades building that threat, nurturing it, pointing it at the world economy like a loaded gun. But here is what Iran's desperate leadership never accounted for. Washington was ready. Not just ready to fight back, ready to make the blockade irrelevant. And in doing so, the United States has just engineered something far more powerful than any military campaign. It has built a new architecture of global energy control that Iran, Russia, and China cannot touch, cannot threaten, and cannot escape. In this video, we are going to show you exactly how that architecture works. The money, the weapons, the pipelines, and the alliances, and why Tehran just handed Washington the greatest strategic gift of the 21st century. Most analysts are focused on the blockade itself. We are going to show you what is being built in its shadow. The crisis began when Iranian forces and their Houthi proxies executed what they described as a coordinated stranglehold on global shipping. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrow choke point between the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Sea, and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait at the southern tip of the Red Sea were both simultaneously targeted. According to Reuters, nearly 2,000 commercial vessels and oil tankers found themselves trapped or rerouted, sending insurance premiums for maritime war risk coverage surging by 400% almost overnight. The Wall Street Journal reported that global economic losses were running into the billions of dollars per hour. Oil prices spiked to $115 per barrel, triggering economic shockwaves from Tokyo to Frankfurt. Tehran celebrated. State media declared it a victory. Supreme Leader Khamenei's advisors briefed that America and its allies would be forced to negotiate to concede to beg. They believed they held the key to the world's energy supply, and they were not going to let go easily. But here is what the desperate strategists in Tehran miscalculated: the world did not beg. It built. Within days of the blockade's full effect being felt, 3 of the most ambitious infrastructure projects in modern history were quietly activated, not as emergency measures, but as strategic initiatives that had been waiting for exactly this moment. According to the Wall Street Journal, Gulf states and international partners began fast-tracking what analysts at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, had already described as the most consequential reorganization of Middle Eastern energy logistics in a generation. The 3 projects: a canal through Oman's Hajar Mountain, range a 1,200-kilometer road and rail corridor from Iraq through Turkey to Europe, and an overland oil pipeline running from Saudi Arabia to Israel's Mediterranean port of Haifa, were now live. And every single one of them ran directly through Washington's sphere of financial, military, and diplomatic influence. Former National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster put it bluntly when he stated, "Energy corridor control is the new carrier group. Whoever secures the pipelines writes the rules." Washington, it turns out, had already written them. And this is where things get really serious for Iran. Now let us break down exactly how the United States has just transformed an act of Iranian aggression into 4 interlocking pillars of American dominance. Because what has happened here is not just a response to a crisis. It is a masterclass in strategic architecture executed with the kind of clinical precision that Iran's cowering leadership never saw coming. The first pillar is financial, and it is the most devastating of all. None of these 3 mega projects can be built without capital at a scale that only one system on Earth can provide. The Hajar Canal alone carries a price tag of between $100 and $300 billion. The development road corridor through Iraq and Turkey requires $17 billion in initial investment. The Saudi Haifa pipeline, while smaller in direct construction cost, requires billions more in security infrastructure, terminal development, and geopolitical risk insurance. According to the World Bank's Infrastructure Finance Division, any project of this magnitude requires a minimum of 3 major international financial institutions providing simultaneous credit guarantees. There is only one currency those institutions operate in. There is only one central bank that backstops that currency. And there is only one government that controls access to the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication, or SWIFT, the financial messaging system through which virtually all major international transactions flow. That government is in Washington. Iran is already excluded from SWIFT. China, despite its Belt and Road ambitions, cannot replace the dollar-denominated credit architecture that these projects require. Russia, economically isolated and financially degraded by years of sanctions, is irrelevant to this equation. Every barrel of oil that flows through these new corridors will be priced in petrodollars, settled through American-aligned financial infrastructure, and insured through Lloyd's of London, a market so deeply embedded in the Anglo-American financial system that Tehran cannot circumvent it without simply ceasing to exist as a trading entity. The blockade that Iran thought would bring the world to its knees has instead handed Washington a pretext to lock in dollar hegemony over energy markets for the next 50 years. But before we get to that, this is a quick reminder that you're watching Hormuz Checkpoint. We bring you the full picture, not just the headlines. So hit subscribe to ensure you stay ahead of the curve. The second pillar is military, and this is where American dominance becomes not just financial, but physical and permanent. Every kilometer of these new energy corridors passes through nations that are without exception customers of the American defense industry. And the activation of these projects has just triggered the largest wave of new defense procurement in the region since the First Gulf War. Oman, which hosts the 32-kilometer Hajar Canal project, currently operates American-supplied air defense batteries and has been in negotiations for additional Patriot Advanced Capability 3, or PAC-3, missile segment enhancement systems. The PAC-3 MSE carries an engagement envelope of approximately 35 kilometers against ballistic missiles and cruise missiles alike, exactly the threat profile that Iranian Shahab and Fateh 110 ballistic missiles represent. Iraq, the anchor of the development road corridor at Grand Four Port, is a customer for American F-16 Fighting Falcon aircraft and is actively evaluating further procurement tied directly to the security requirements of the new corridor. And Israel, the Mediterranean terminus of the Saudi pipeline at Haifa, operates the most advanced variant of the F-35 Lightning II in the world. The F-35 are a platform so capable that Israeli engineers have integrated domestic weapon systems into its architecture that even the United States Air Force does not carry. The Adir's combat radius of approximately 1,100 kilometers covers the entire pipeline route from the Negev desert to the Saudi border and back. Layered above all of this surveillance is provided continuously by fleets of MQ-9 Reaper unmanned aerial vehicles, or UAVs, operating at ceiling altitudes of 15,000 meters, with endurance of up to 27 hours per sortie. The Reaper is not just a drone. It is a persistent eye over every pipeline valve, every rail junction, every port terminal on all three corridors simultaneously. Iran cannot move against these routes without being seen. And if it tries the USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group, or CSG, currently positioned in the Gulf of Oman, stands ready to respond with a strike package that would make any Iranian military commander's hands tremble. What comes next for any Iranian commander who orders an attack on these corridors could change everything, and none of the scenarios favor Tehran. The third pillar is diplomatic, and it is perhaps the most elegant. The Saudi Haifa pipeline is not merely an infrastructure project. It is the most consequential act of Arab-Israeli normalization since the signing of the Abraham Accords in 2020. CSIS analysts have described it as the most durable normalization mechanism in the modern Middle East. And the reason is simple. When Saudi crude oil flows through Israeli territory to European markets via the Mediterranean, the economic interests of Riyadh and Jerusalem become permanently intertwined. Peace between Saudi Arabia and Israel stops being a diplomatic aspiration and becomes a financial necessity. Every day the pipeline operates, the cost of renewed conflict between the two nations rises. And Washington, which brokered the Abraham Accords and has quietly facilitated every step of the pipeline's development, sites at the center of that web. Iran's entire regional strategy for 4 decades has rested on keeping the Arab world and Israel permanently divided using Palestinian-caused sectarian tension and proxy warfare to ensure that no unified front could ever form against Tehran's ambitions. The Saudi Haifa pipeline does not just bypass Hormuz. It bypasses Iran's entire strategic framework for regional dominance. Tehran is not just losing a choke point, it is losing the ideological architecture that has kept it relevant. And the regime knows it. Iranian state media has been scrambling to characterize the pipeline as a betrayal of the Islamic world, a sign of desperation from a leadership that can see its influence crumbling in real time. Now that is not even the worst part for Iran. Because the fourth pillar of American dominance here is the one that Beijing fears most, and that is the strategic encirclement of Chinese energy dependency. China imports more than 70% of its crude oil through the Strait of Hormuz and the broader Persian Gulf shipping lanes. Beijing has spent decades cultivating Iranian partnership precisely because it needed an alternative to complete American-controlled energy supply chains. The Belt and Road Initiative. China's trillion-dollar infrastructure program was in part designed to create overland energy routes that could not be interdicted by American naval power. But here is the brutal reality that China's leadership is now confronting. The 3 corridors being built in response to Iran's blockade are not Chinese corridors. They are not Russian corridors. They are corridors financed by dollar-denominated debt, protected by American and allied weapon systems, and anchored by American diplomatic frameworks. Every barrel of oil that flows through them flows on Washington's terms. According to CIPRI's 2024 annual report, the United States accounts for 42% of global arms exports, and the nations hosting these new corridors represent some of its most important customers. Beijing cannot replicate this ecosystem. It cannot replace SWIFT with CIPS fast enough. It cannot replace Patriot with HQ-22 credibly enough. And it cannot project naval power into the Gulf of Oman at a scale that challenges a Gerald R. Ford-class carrier strike group. As we covered in our video on Video Lion Quan 1, the US Navy's carrier strike group strategy in the Gulf. American naval dominance in these waters is not just numerical, it is generational. And the Chinese leadership, for all its public bluster, is cowering behind closed doors at the implications of what Washington has just done. So what does all of this mean for the strategic balance of power going forward? The answer is simple, and it is devastating for Iran, for China, and for every actor that has spent the last 2 decades betting against American staying power. Tehran launched the Hormuz blockade believing it held the final card. It believed that the world's dependence on Gulf oil gave it an existential veto over the global economy, that no Western power would dare challenge it directly, because the consequences of escalation would be too costly. What Iran failed to understand is that Washington does not need to win the battle for Hormuz. Washington only needs to make Hormuz irrelevant. And that is precisely what it has done. 3 corridors, 4 pillars. One outcome: the permanent structural marginalization of Iranian leverage. The regime in Tehran is now facing something far more dangerous than a military defeat. Military defeats can be absorbed, rebuilt from propagandized around. What Iran is facing is an architectural defeat, a reconfiguration of the physical and financial infrastructure of global energy that leaves it with nothing to threaten and nowhere to hide. The mullahs can still posture. They can still rattle missiles and deploy proxies and rage at the great Satan on state television. But every day these corridors inch closer to completion. Tehran's threats become quieter. Its leverage shrinks. Its ability to hold the world hostage evaporates. And the regime knows it. The question now is not whether Iran has lost this confrontation. It has. The question is how the regime responds to a strategic defeat it cannot reverse, and whether the desperation in Tehran produces something reckless. We will be exploring exactly that in our next deep dive. And if the history of cornered regimes tells us anything, it tells us to watch very carefully. Find out more in our video on why China is terrified of losing access to Gulf oil, the 70% dependency nobody talks about, which you can find on our channel right now. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to Hormuz Checkpoint, to see more of our coverage of the Hormuz crisis and the reshaping of the global energy order. And thank you as always for watching.